Hey guys, it's Generalkidd here. How is everyone doing today? So, for today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys 10 things that you probably never knew about Halo Reach's cutscenes. A lot of them are behind the scenes, actually. Because of that, you probably never noticed them. But let's get right into it. So, the first one that we're going to be taking a look at, for number 1, is dead bodies being alive in cutscenes. So what I mean by that is, for example, on a mission Pillar of Autumn, you see a dead Marine here near the beginning. It's the only Marine body around the area, but, body's dead. And your first assumption, your first thought is probably he spawned that way. He was like that the entire time. Well, that's not exactly the case. So, let's use that mod again that I've used in the past, where we fly around during cutscenes in theater mode. And let's take a look at what the body's like. So this is pretty much right at the beginning of the cutscene Pillar of Autumn. And so, nothing else is really going on down here. So let's fly to where the Marine's body is, or was. And as you can see here, he is still alive. And if I resume the cutscene, he's like breathing and everything. He's perfectly fine, he's perfectly healthy, he's just standing there. And then, of course, after the cutscene ends, that's when the Marine drops dead, I guess, at some point, off camera and, out of your view, so you don't really see it. But during the whole length of the cutscene, he is still alive, very much alive. For number 2, and there's actually going to be quite a few things on the tip of the spear. That intro cutscene has a lot of interesting stuff in it. So, the first one we'll start with is near the beginning of the cutscene, when Auntie Dot starts talking to you and she starts briefing you. She shows you a few scenes of the planet from orbit and gives you some more information. You can see her flashing on the top right corner and some more briefing information at the bottom left and right corners as well. And this continues for a few scenes where she, continues marking things and other information and, tells you what to do. But where are these scenes actually? What's actually going on? So we fly around during the tip of the spear cutscene. Those scenes, the briefing scenes, are actually just like floating images here above the ground. But that's not the most interesting thing about this. What's actually interesting is Auntie Dot herself, her whole briefing thing, the text on the screen and everything. Those are actually just like floating overlays here. And, if we zoom out, they're really small. And, if we zoom in, which is how... It's kind of like a camera trick, actually. They're just floating text. And then as the background changes, it slides to the left. But the text stays there. But it's, the floating text, the camera trick, it's like up close to the floating text. So you don't really realize that, like, when you pull the camera back, this is actually where we are. But, yeah, it's a really interesting thing here. And it's not something that you ever would have probably guessed that's going on there, but the briefing screens are actually out there somewhere in the cutscene. Now, number 3, this is actually a really cool and interesting one, and I almost wish it was like a usable vehicle. But during this cutscene, you see a bunch of tanks driving down there, right? And they're all there. But if we get a closer look at the tanks, a little bit later in the cutscene, actually, this is where they are. Let's fly up close to the tanks. Here's one of the tanks, and this one is actually a double barrel tank, and I really have no idea why it's a double barrel tank. I think it might be like 2 tanks inside of each other with like their barrels pointing at somewhat different angles, but I'm not actually entirely sure. It is a solid tank actually, but other than that, it's all the other tanks around the area. They're all regular tanks, but this one in particular is the only double barrel tank I've ever seen, and I'm not sure if it's like some kind of like hidden Easter egg in a cutscene that you're never gonna be able to see normally, or if it's some kind of like mistake with like 2 tanks inside of each other with the same path. I don't know for sure, but it's actually a really cool thing. And can you just imagine like having like a double barrel tank in like gameplay? That'd be so OP, like firing 2 tank rounds at the same time, or being able to like rapid fire too, like back and forth. That'd be like pretty incredible. But anyways, so number 4, and you probably already noticed this actually in the previous one. You might have at least seen it briefly. But in the cutscene, this is the unmodded cutscene. We see them driving on this nice road here. It's a very drivable road for them. And you wouldn't think anything different about the ground that they're driving on. but there actually is something interesting about the ground that they're driving on. So once again, let's take a look at behind the scenes of this cutscene to see what's going on with that road that they're on. As you can see, they're not actually driving on the actual ground of the map. They're actually driving on a self-paving road, essentially. Well, it's not exactly paved, but it's a lot smoother and, I guess, higher quality than the actual ground here. And I'm not sure why they didn't actually use like the regular ground, but I don't know. They're just as they're driving, it's actually spawning more and more road for them to drive on, so to speak. And speaking of that driving convoy there, if we take a look at the beginning, whoever's leading this convoy, like first of all these vehicles that we see in the scene, and even in the regular cutscene, we see them all have drivers and passengers and gunners on the turrets and everything. And, you know, it's all fine and dandy. But if we go a little bit further, especially if it goes out of the camera or somewhere that you normally don't see, like an angle, some of the Warthogs are driverless. And they'll drive by themselves without any driver, which is, you know, to be expected. They're scripted to just drive. Actually, all these Warthogs are all scripted to drive. It's not actually the AI that's driving them. They're all just scripted to follow that path. They're more rigged, actually, to follow that path. But aside from that driverless Warthog that was totally driverless and empty, if you go further ahead, and here's where it gets a little more interesting, these Warthogs, they are driverless, but they do have gunners on them, which is actually kind of interesting because obviously the Warthogs, that one Warthog before was driverless because it saves resources. They don't need to render a whole Marine driving a Warthog that you never see. But here they actually do render the gunners on the Marine, even though you don't see them. But then later, you know, they keep driving and they're still driverless. But they do render the gunners at least, but they don't render the drivers, which is a little interesting, I guess. Now for number 6, this one I actually did not quite expect it, but during this scene, as they're driving forward, they're all charging towards, you know, a Covenant invasion force, and you can see like a huge cloud up ahead, like mist and everything and dust, and you know, obviously the Covenant come from there. And then here later in the scene, when Cat detonates the tower up there, that obviously sets off the Covenant. And once again, we see that little mist in the distance with a bunch of Banshees attacking them. Let's get a closer look at that mist in the distance. So here's where they're charging from, and there is in the distance. We only get a brief glimpses, but if we get a close-up look, we can actually see what's out there. And as we get a closer look, you can see the Covenant forces are massive in numbers. The Marines that are attacking the UNSC, they're really outnumbered. Look at here, just like a huge, large squadron Banshees, just like a few dozen Ghosts, a couple dozen Wraiths. But if we go further back to see what else is out there, it is crazy. Like there's even more, like a few dozen Banshees. There's like hundreds of Ghosts in the distance, and there's like dozens of Phantoms and dozens of Wraiths. It's like crazy. There's like no way. It's like if we go even further, like to this direction, there's probably like 1,000 Ghosts out there, and you know, a dozen Phantoms, and like I said, there's several dozen, probably like hundreds of Banshees in the sky. And the UNSC is basically attacking with maybe 100 vehicles at the most in the cutscene. It's they're not they're not gonna make it by. They're not gonna make it through this. And you know, during that cutscene, it makes it look like, you know, it's like 100 UNSC vehicles versus like maybe 100 Covenant vehicles as well. But they're actually going up against like thousands probably. Now, for number 7, this one is towards the end of the tip of the spear cutscene. When they cross this bridge, the bridge gets taken out, and they have to you know, make a crash landing with their Warthog here. But after the cutscene, when Noble 6 gets back up, you see in the distance another Warthog with Marines try to make the jump, but they don't make it. They crash and they fall down into the ravine, or so it seems. So let's once again take a look at what's going on behind the scenes here. So here is them approaching the bridge. The bridge gets blown out, and well, let's continue here. So let's watch as Noble 6 and Cat make their jump, and then they crash. That's fine and dandy and all, but after that, here is the other Warthog of the Marines that are about to crash. So here they make their jump, and boom, they crash. But they actually don't fall into the ravine. They actually get stuck. And obviously after the cutscene, they are deloaded. But at least during the cutscene, they actually don't drop down. They're actually stuck. And Noble 6 kind of just, he doesn't bother checking to see if they're okay because they actually are relatively okay. They're just stuck there, and nobody goes to help them, technically speaking. But yeah, so it's just a little thing there. Now, number 8, this is kind of similar to the first thing I showed you, but this one you actually don't need any mods to take a look at for yourself. You can actually figure this out. Notice this by just playing a little bit of the game in theater mode, and all you need to do is, well, first of all, on Mission Lone Wolf, as you can see, just like on Pillar of Autumn, there's a lot of dead bodies lying around, Marines and actually Spartans, but we're going to be focusing on the Marines for this particular scene. So in theater mode, you can fly around anything or whatever, just rewind the clip all the way to the very beginning, all the way to the very start, as far back as you can. When you get to 0 seconds and you fly around, all the dead Marine bodies will be standing up again and still alive. Now, unlike Pillar of Autumn, if you resume, they'll instantly be dead. On Pillar of Autumn, the Marines are actually still alive the entire time until the cutscene ends. But here, they die right as the cutscene begins, but they're still standing. This only affects the Marines, though. There are Spartans, a lot of dead Spartans around this map, around this mission, but they stay dead, either during the entire cutscene, even before and after. But at least the Marines are actually, all of them are still alive for like a split second. Now for number 9, I've actually covered this in a previous video before, but I figured I'd throw it into this as well. And that is Noble 6's face, that we never get to see in gameplay. We never actually get to see what he looks like with his helmet off either. So, well, for those of you who've seen my previous video, then you already know what happens here. But for those of you who haven't, let's take a look one more time. Let's see what happens, or what Noble 6 looks like when he takes his helmet off. So here is the part of the cutscene where he takes his helmet off, and you can already see he's actually headless without his helmet on. Now here's where he actually takes the helmet off, but yeah, so there you have it. That is what he looks like without his helmet on. He is totally headless, and there's actually a technical reason behind this, and that is because that cutscene happens in first person. So in order to avoid like the camera clipping into parts of the helmet, they just make the Spartan helmetless or headless, and the cutscene camera is actually where the head would be, where the helmet would be. But like I said, to keep the camera from like clipping into the helmet and stuff, so it looks clean and everything, that's why it's headless. And you'll see this in a lot of other Halo cutscenes, or actually in video game cutscenes in general, where it's like a first-person scene. Usually the character is headless, usually. Now for this last one, this is another little interesting thing, but during the intro cutscene of Pillar of Autumn, we see Carter flying the Pelican, and he flies for like a good distance. We see him flying for quite a little bit, and it looks like he's flying pretty far through this mission, right? He's flying through the canyon, he's flying through the mountains and everything of the whole mission Pillar of Autumn. But is that actually where he's flying? Like, is he actually flying in a straight line or something? Well, let's take a look actually to see what his actual flight path is. So here's his Pelican, and he's actually so far he's flying forward, teleporting a little bit to match the camera changes. But let's keep going. So here he flies to basically the edge, and he teleports all the way back, and then keeps flying the same path again. And we're taking a little bit look inside, but basically his path is just flying forward, hitting a distance, and then teleporting back, and then flying back again. He does that like a few times before finally veering off the different path. But yeah, so there you have it, folks. That is 10 interesting things that you probably never noticed in Halo Reach's cutscenes before, and hopefully you guys did enjoy this and did indeed find it to be interesting. And of course, if you did, make sure to leave a like, leave your thoughts in the comments. If there's anything I missed in this or anything else you want me to take a look at, just let me know, and I'll do my best to look into it. But other than that, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.